Hello everyone, today we're going to be cooking with a potentially controversial topic. This is obviously something that the community is very divided on, and I think it's interesting how in these days leading up to Tekken 8 you can really see the different motivations that people bring to playing this franchise, and I feel like half the community are worrying about whether or not Tekken 8 will have serious competitive integrity, and the other half is worrying about whether or not Tekken 8 will have a boob slider or, Yoshi's legacy costume from Tekken 3. But something that we know for a fact that Tekken 8 will have is a best of 3 system or first to 2 system in its ranked matches. And I was really surprised when I heard this. It's not something that I expected them to do. Apparently it's something that other fighting games are doing right now as well. And if you're hearing about it for the first time, what this means is basically this. When you're in the lobby in Tekken 8 and you get matched up against an opponent and you take the match, you are now committing to playing that person until one of you wins 2 matches, and then the matchup will end and you will both be sent back to the lobby, which means that the maximum amount of matches you can have against the same opponent is 3, because you can win 1 each and then there's a final one, but you can no longer have long deathmatch sets against the same person, but you also can't leave after just 1 match, right? So whether you think this is good or bad, there is at least this interesting sort of mitigating factor built into the initial idea, which I think is kind of elegant and cool. But it is something that people are very divided on, and I wanted to figure out how I felt about it, and I wanted to know how you felt about it. So I did a poll on my channel a couple of days ago. You can tell people have strong feelings about it. I've had over like 1,800 votes and a bunch of comments. I've seen some really interesting points made and some good takes. I've seen a bunch of kind of confused and contradictory takes as well. But what I want to do in the video is like go through these common arguments that I've seen and break them down a bit, and then by the end I'll tell you how I've decided that I feel about it. But if we start by looking at the poll, 54% of people thought this was a good idea, but 46% said that they thought it was a bad idea. So even though there's a small majority who are for this change, it is something that is dividing the community basically down the middle. So divisive issue, right? Let's jump in and look at some of these common arguments that I saw. And the first one that I thought was interesting is that this will favor gimmicky characters and lab characters. This is good for people who play those characters. And it's definitely true that in Tekken, some characters rely on these gimmicks that are super, super strong when you play somebody for the first time who might not be used to it, but then the power of those gimmicks dramatically falls off as the opponent gains the ability to kind of adapt and learn what to do against it. And I can tell you that that's true from experience, because earlier in T7 I played a lot of Elisa, and she's very much like that. Very unorthodox, very rare matchup for people, and so you can do stuff that they simply don't know what to do about and win. And then as they start to try things out and learn and adapt and react, Elisa just becomes dramatically weaker, in my opinion. You might not agree on my view on Elisa, but it's kind of like that, because she doesn't have these strong, solid mix-up options where both, the mid and the low are unreactable. She doesn't have these like strong, safe or plus-on block counter hit mids with good range that just lands you in a favorable situation if you loop them. Characters that have those tools are very good in long sets, because a super solid, inescapable 50-50 is good in the first match you play against somebody, but it's still good in the 100th match you play against them. It's more an issue of how and when you choose to apply them at that point, whereas something like a gimmicky character has to rely on more tricks and confusion and lack of matchup knowledge, becomes weaker and weaker as the match goes on, right? So that's definitely a thing that happens in Tekken, but the reason I don't think this is a good argument against the best of 3 system is this. Many of people who play those characters and rely on those gimmicks right now will play you 1 time and then leave, and they don't have the ability to do that anymore with this system. You will at least get to play them at least twice, maybe 3 times, right? And so if the person was a one and doneer in Tekken 7, you now have the ability to play them for at least twice as long. And if they were a person, if they're a gimmicky character, but they like to play long deathmatch sets, they are actually leaning into a playstyle that doesn't favor them or their character in the first place. So I don't really see this being a good, even though it is something that happens, I don't think it's a good argument against the system. You could actually twist it a bit and say that it's an argument for this system. But something that relates to this is people were talking about how this will damage your ability to learn how to play against a specific person or a character. It's going to damage your ability to learn matchups, because you can't have these long death matches where you gradually like pick up things and try things, right? And again, it's like a valid point, because things like that do happen. You can have like a 10-game set against somebody, and in the beginning you didn't know what to do, but by the end you're very confident and you're beating them, no problem. Now, I think one thing Namco are trying to do to mitigate this is that they are boosting your ability to do a lot of learning outside of matches with things like the Super Ghost, My Replay and Tips, and all the rest of it. So I think their philosophy and their thought is you're going to do more of your learning outside matches, and then you're going to bring that knowledge into matches. My sort of controversial take that I had in my last video where we talked about this was that I don't think that these enhanced learning systems like Special Style or My Replay and Tips or Super Ghost, I don't think that they will end up being useful for people, and I don't think serious competitive players will rely on them. And I could be completely wrong about that, but I don't think I am. I think if you want to learn how to do well against a character, or watching your replays and seeing, where things went wrong might be a good idea. But I'm a big fan of normal, practice mode and learning while playing matches and getting a lot of match time in, and then trying to like think and be creative and pick things up as you are playing those matches, right? So I think if you look at a replay or you look at somebody else play the character you're playing against, and you go into practice mode and you set up your dummy, because you can make them do all kinds of things, block and duck and do certain moves, right? And then you try and activate your Tekken mind and get creative. Like, think about the frame data, think about your character. What could I potentially do here to deal with this? You try out movement, you try out counter hits, and you figure it out. Not only are you learning how to get better in that matchup, you're actually getting better as a strategist and a player, and you're doing some very useful thinking. And I think even though that might feel like a slow and more arduous process, it is like a really solid path to being better, in my opinion. And I think it's better than relying on something like these other modes. Again, I could be wrong about that. But it's also true that, okay, so my prediction is that you will play something like between 50 to 80% of all the matches you play and ranked in Tekken 8 will be against the Kazuya. It feels like that's the direction we're heading in. The other 20% will be Jin, by the way. But if that's true, and Kazuya, traditionally has 3 or 4 moves that you have to worry about, you don't have to play the same person over and over to learn how to play against that character, because what you learn in one match against this Kazuya, you can apply in the next match you play, which will also be against the Kazuya, right? Unless the person you play against is like really creative and playing in a specific way. And then I guess maybe try out the Super Ghost, maybe look at your replay. So I can see the argument that this will damage your learning ability a little bit, but I don't think it's as big of a problem as many of you might think. And you would be surprised at how much learning and how much adapting you can actually do if you have 2 or 3 matches. The next big one I've seen a lot is this is a decent idea, but it needs to be more. Not a best of 3, but maybe a first of 3, best of 5 or something like that. A lot of people made the argument that it should be even more than that, which really surprised me. I don't think that sounds like a great idea at all, simply because of the reason that you now have to commit a bunch of time and you have to leave a bunch of points on the table every time you match up against somebody. So I'm going to pull a number out my ass here, but I don't think it's completely inaccurate. Say that an average Tekken match, including loading screens and everything else, is something like 2.5 minutes. If you have first to 3, the maximum potential amount of matches you could play against somebody is 5, because you can win 2 each and then there's a final match, which means that you will spend something like a quarter of an hour playing against this one person, like 12 to 15 minutes, right? It's kind of a long time. It means that If, dinner's almost ready and you kind of want to go to the bathroom or you have to leave for work soon, which is something that happens to me all the time, you will not be able to commit to these matches because they will just be big commitments in terms of real world time. And if you have even more than that, then that obviously spirals out of proportion, and you now have to allocate a lot of time and a lot of points to every individual match that you play. But I think a lot of people might see that as a positive, and I can kind of understand that as well. For example, one of the reasons I think that Diablo 3's greater rifts are so good is because I can like jump in and do a rift, and a greater rift is usually, I mean, if it's a push, it's 15 minutes. If it's not a push, if it's like a speed clear, it's like 2 minutes. But I can like know that, okay, I've got 15 minutes here. I could do like a push on my monk, and it's not a huge amount of time to commit to one match, but it's still a lot more than maybe playing somebody 3 times and then just, going. So, yeah, I think if you're going to do like a forced amount of matches, this is actually the perfect sweet spot. I think best of 3 is the perfect sweet spot, and I wouldn't want it to be more. But I can understand why you would want more and you think this isn't enough. Another argument that kind of relates to that was this will lead to empty lobbies, and you will have to sit around and like wait for matches more because you get sent back to the lobby more because you can't play death matches. This is one of those arguments that I don't think makes a whole lot of sense, because the opposite of that could be true. Could be true that we do more waiting. It could be very true that we do a lot less waiting because of this. When you are like right now in Tekken 7, the only people who are playing ranked are people who have committed to that game long term. And if you're a high ranker and you sit down to play, there might not be many people at all out there who you could potentially play against. If there are 3 of you, for example, and 2 are locked in a 1 hour long death match, there's nobody for you to play against, right? But if people are constantly being sent back into the lobby, there are more and more varied opponents for you to match up against. So not only could you spend less time waiting, you might also get a more diverse pool of players to play against. And I think that's very good, because something is true in T7 is you might play against somebody and feel like, damn, that wasn't fun at all, and I don't want to play against this person anymore. So you go back to the lobby and the game matches you up against the exact same person again, and you go, okay, fine, you play them again, you leave again, and it matches you up against that person again and again and again, right? I think the way that works, and Namco, if you're watching this video, which is unlikely, maybe you can chime in and tell me if I'm right in the comments, but I have realized now that when I'm offered a match in the lobby in Tekken 7, I can, like, subconsciously, I know if it's the same person or not before I take the match. And so how could that be possible? How could I predict that unless I have Jedi mind powers and I can see the future? I think the reason I can do it is I've played thousands and thousands of online matches in this game, and there's a set amount of time before I'm offered the next match, and when it's that specific amount of seconds, then it's probably going to be the same person. And if that's true, that means that the system implemented in Tekken 7 right now puts you both back in the lobby when the match ends, and then it has a minimum amount of time that has to pass before it matches you against the same specific person again. Because you can go back to the lobby and instantly get a match, and if you instantly get a match, it's always a new person, right? And so if that's true and that's how it works, you could actually mitigate that poor matchmaking thing where you have to play the same person over and over by extending the window of time that has to pass before it can match you against the same person again. So there are things that Namco could change to actually make the matchmaking and the lobby a lot more like easy to be and make you spend less time in it. Having played the network test, I can also tell you that loading times are much better in this game compared to 7, and so the amount of waiting you will do and the amount of time you will spend in the lobby will already be like shorter, because you're going to be looking at loading screens a lot less, which is a fantastic change as well. So I don't think the more waiting argument is very good, because we don't know until we play the game a lot, but my prediction is that the opposite will be true, and you will actually play against more people and different people and different characters, although they will probably all be using Kazuya. Another one that's really big, I think this might be like the biggest one that people talked about, is that this prevents a specific type of boosting, right? So I know a person. This is a real person, and he won't mind me saying this because I know that he's a Chad, which means that he already kind of agrees with me about this. But he got his TGO in kind of an unfair way, and his TGO is kind of not 100% legit because he's a super talented player, and he can get TGP easily, which is super high, right? But then he matched up against a person who was also TGP, and if you want to go to TGO, you have to play other TGPs because it awards much more points. You get 5,000 points, right, for playing against other TGPs. But he played against somebody who was obviously cheating, who had boosted the rank to that point, or like safe scummed or something like that. You could tell that in terms of like a caliber of player, he was like 30 ranks below that. So it was the easiest clap ever, but he kept death matching him or like kept playing matches, and he got all these points and he got his TGO promotion. And so that's obviously an extreme situation, and all of this comes down to whether or not Namco will implement good anti-cheat in the next game. Everything hinges on that, and if they won't, and you can still just like plug or whatever, and there are no repercussions like plugging or cheating, then this is all pointless and this video doesn't have to exist. But I'm going to assume that something's going to be happening in that department. But you've also seen people make the argument, okay, you have this like famous popular player and they match up against somebody who like, you know, is a fan of theirs or a viewer, and they want to play that person like on stream because it's fun or whatever. They don't want to get criticized publicly for leaving, and then the famous player can sort of grind that obviously weaker player for a bunch of points and get these promos. And while I do think things like that happen, I mean, it's like I've seen people like say, oh, but you know, you left, you should have played me more and more and more. It's true that you can be at the same rank as somebody, but still you can feel that you are a different caliber of player. This person is definitely weaker than me. Maybe they are like peaking at this rank, but I can easily get it with this alt character of mine, for example. And sometimes you feel like, wow, this person is the same rank as me, but they are like ahead and they're much better. Or maybe they're playing a character that is much, much more powerful than mine or something like that. And the reason I don't like it when people say, well, you should still commit to playing against me, I don't like the fact that you left. The game menu is saying, hey, do you want to play this person more? And you have the option of picking no if you don't feel like it. And the other person is like, you owe me to sit around and spend a lot of your real world time and your points letting me gain these points on you. And that's kind of a grandiose and fucked up way of thinking. But at the same time, if you're a really high ranker, sitting in the lobby and waiting for a long time is frustrating, and it's probably a good courtesy to at least commit to playing a couple of matches against the same person before you leave. But balance comes into that as well. You know, I can see if you know, you're playing a cool character, I'm playing a cool character, we might be reasonably evenly matched. Maybe you're much better than me, but you know, fuck it, fair enough, let's play a couple of games. But if you're playing Kunimitsu, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, you're completely illegitimate, right? And you don't owe somebody who plays a character like that anything. And we don't know what the balance in Tekken 8 is going to be like. So it becomes a complex and sort of difficult question. But yeah, this will probably, my prediction when it comes to this and like farming and boosting is that it will make ranks more legitimate overall. Because if you think about it this way, if you're able to go from one rank to the next, what should that be an indication of? It should be an indication of the fact that you are, on average, better than the people who are in the rank that you are now leaving, which is why you can go above them. And so a more accurate representation of that is you being able to beat all of these different opponents who are at that rank, not the fact they're able to beat this one person who is at that rank many, many times, right? So I think it will actually create a more like legitimate representation of skill in terms of the rank you have. It should have that kind of an outcome, but it's also something that we have to see implemented, and we're going to have to see what happens with it. But yeah, it will prevent that type of boosting, and obviously people can do things like, you know, straight up cheat and like have an opponent who boosts themselves to a rank using cheating, finding them in ranked, death matching them and ranking off them, and then having that person boost themselves to the new rank. And so even though you are not using software or implementing these things, you can still boost yourself. So it's like a spectrum of different things you can do to use death matches for boosting. But there you go. And it's not like I don't get the fact that it's also super fun. And I mean, a lot of people romanticize the idea of finding this one opponent and having like a good, intense match that you really want to win and playing them for a long time. That's also special, and that is something that we're losing a little bit with this system. But what people have said is that you can still do that, only you're going to have to do it probably outside of the ranked environment, like in quick match or whatever. I mean, obviously it's going to be possible to do that sort of thing still, but just outside of the ranking system. So these are like the big common arguments for and against this that I've seen. And here at the end, I want to tell you like sort of how I feel about it, and what side I come down on. And obviously my perspective is very, very subjective, right? I think this is a fantastic change. I really, really like it. It's personally one of the most like positive and refreshing things I've seen them do with this game. And so for those of you who like to say that I'm always negative and pissing on the game in all my videos, I'm being completely honest here. I think this is fantastic. The reason I feel specifically, for me that this is going to be great is this. First of all, now there's a standard format for rank that everybody has to play in, which means that, okay, some people are playing these long deathmatch sets. Maybe some of them are boosting or grinding, fans of theirs. Maybe some people are just playing long death matches against other people, whatever. Maybe some people are relying on gimmicks and doing one and dones or whatever. So they're ranking up and playing in different ways. Now that there's a standard format, everybody is having to play the same kind of way, which makes ranked into a more level playing field as far as I can tell. It also spreads the opposition out, which means that you will rank up by being the better player on average in that rank, and I think that's cool. The other thing that is huge is that I think this will help alleviate a lot of ranked anxiety and a lot of ranked hate, right? So I have played a bunch of matches where I've decided that I don't want to continue the match, and then I've gotten comments and I've gotten criticized for doing that. And people always like to infer these motivations. Oh, this kid left, he must be salty. Oh, this kid kept playing, he must be salty. We always assume the worst about one another. But now that you have to play in this certain way, you no longer have to decide whether or not you want to take the matches. And you no longer have to speculate on how your opponent feels or what they might think about you and things like that. And I think that's obviously like a question of mentality and all the rest of it. But the fact that it just alleviates and takes that out of the equation is going to make a lot of the anxiety go away for people. And anxiety is and controversy and salt and people kind of attacking one another in messages is unfortunately a huge part of playing ranked fighting games. And so I think it's good for that as well. Another cool thing is that there's no more one and doneing. And so if you like deathmatches, you can't do that anymore, but you also can't get one and done, which means that you will at least get 2 to 3 matches against every opponent. And if a lot of people are one and doneing you right now, you will be playing more on average. So it's you can't get the really long sets, but you also won't get the really, really short one match set. And so it kind of lands you in a middle ground where, okay, if the community is super divided on this and half want this and half want this, we now have a solution where we both kind of get a little bit of what we want. Now, the argument against that is what we have right now is the choice. We can do whatever we want. We can one and done, and we can keep on playing forever, right? But I think making people play at least twice is going to be good. It's going to make everything a little bit more accurate. When you see that somebody's obviously stronger than you and you're intimidated and you just leave, you now at least have to commit, and the stronger person gets the ability to actually establish that advantage and get those points and have a more accurate rank, representation of how good they are. So overall, I think it's a really, really good change, and I'm in favor of it. But so many people have been talking about it that I wouldn't be surprised if they change it or implement some other version of it when the game eventually comes out. The best idea and the best take I've seen on the entire thing was a person who wrote that you could make it into where you are able to keep playing longer than best of 3, but after the best of 3, points are no longer exchanged. And that's a fantastic idea, because all these fun death matches where you're enjoying playing against somebody, like Talon is a really good British competitive tournament player who I match up against a lot because he snipes me like a bitch, right? But we have these crazy good matches all the time, and I have a lot of fun with them. we would still be able to do that, but points just stop being exchanged after a certain point. So you wouldn't have to like, hey, I enjoyed playing against you, would you mind being my friend, and then maybe we can meet up in quick match and we can play some more, and go through all those steps. You can just do it right away. And I think that's like, that right there is like the true perfect sweet spot as far as I can tell. But then the final point I want to make about this, even though I mentioned it earlier, is that none of this works at all and the entire structure crumbles unless Namco start taking anti-cheating very, very seriously in this game compared to the last one. Because you can definitely still one and done people in Tekken 8 if you can play one match, unplug your Ethernet cable, and then have no repercussions in terms of being punished for that. You know that you can plug right now in Tekken 7 on the loading screen before the match starts, and it will not register as a plug unless the loading has stopped and you're actually spawning on the stage. It's at that point a plug will result in a penalty. If that's still a thing, so you play one match in Tekken 8, you take the next one, loading screen comes up, and before the match starts, you're able to plug. That would be a huge problem. I don't think that would happen because I don't think the game actually, like, reloads the stage or anything. Probably just, goes again. But you can also plug in this game and get disconnection percentage and then just make that go away by manipulating your game files. You can just download a rank editor and say, I would like to be TGP. You could download one of these like one-hit kill hacks and just, kill people in a single hit and rank up infinitely. You can use these like hacks that allow you to like overload the person's system and make them plug on you. That's a software that exists right now. And unless all of that goes away, whether this is a good idea or not doesn't matter, because there is nothing for it to cling to. There is no structure for this whole thing to be implemented into. It just goes away when cheating is widespread and possible. So I think and I've been saying this literally for years in dozens if not hundreds of videos, the game needs anti-cheat and it needs clear rules, and just a standard format with clear rules that always apply to everybody is just a fantastic idea overall. So I really like it. No more one and done, no more deathmatch, no more boosting. It just kind of works for me, and it means that when I play this game now, what I can do is I can just go in the lobby and then I can turn off that entire part of my brain that considers whether or not I should keep playing the person. I can just completely forget about that, and I know every single time exactly what's going to happen. It's going to be 2 to 3 matches and then back to the lobby, and then hopefully I get to play all these different players, all these different characters, although I think almost everybody will be playing Jin or Kazuya. And I think that's good. It's good for rank distribution. It's good for relieving anxiety. It's good for all these useful things. But that's my take on it. This turned out to be like a 30-minute video, right? A little bit ranty, but it is a very interesting topic, and I think more and more of these interesting discussions on the ranked environment and rank inflation and stuff like that is super useful, because even though story mode might be fun and customization mode might be fun, and you want to see the arcade ending when, Dragunov sings karaoke and Kazuya collects sneakers, the vast majority of all the time that will ever be spent by all the people playing this game, at least on the whole, will be spent in ranked mode. Rank online is the main game mode of Tekken. Offline happens very, very rarely and only to very few people. Single player focused players tend to play the game for a while but not long term, and so by far the most used, the most enjoyed, the most important game mode is ranked online, and that is why it's super important to calibrate this in a way where these hundreds, if not thousands and tens of thousands of hours we will spend in it are as enjoyable and ergonomic as possible. It really, really matters, and don't buy it when people tell you that offline is trash and doesn't matter or whatever. Just get me some offline matches. I want to go to an event or whatever, because the fact of the matter is 99.9% of people who play this game will never do that, won't have the ability, the time, the money to do anything like that, right? Online is the main game mode, and it has to be perfect, or as perfect as it can be. Netcode, anti-cheat, and a good ranking system in terms of points, right? All right, let me know what you guys thought. Thank you so much for watching the video, and I'll see you very soon. Bye-bye.